Okay, now we usually we can see a production function economic system is equal to the capital stock to the power of alpha, which multiply the labor force to the power of alpha minus 1 with alpha between 0 and 1. This is a typical Cobb-Douglas production function we can have in micro and macroeconomics. But now we can simplify this relation, assuming that we are in menu run, so we have no capital accumulation, we have no technical progress, and the supply and the production is, we can see it's just equal to n, where n is the number of employed people. If the number of employed people actually is equal to a, which multiply n, where a is the production for each employed people, we can normalize a to 1, and we can get a equal to n. So for this the a really simplified version of the production function, but it's useful to simplify the computation too, because general result does not change. And in this case, so this is our first assumption. So that if in this case firms will fix or will set a level of price according to a markup on the cost, the labor cost. So they are these firms will apply a markup me so they on their labor cost, which is the nominal wage. Using this equation, we are able to obtain a real wage dividing both sides by the level of price. Sorry, this does not simplify. The real wage which firms are want to pay will be equal to 1 divided by 1 plus the markup. So if this is true, this is the real wage that firms want to pay in order to obtain the markup. Me, for instance, 20%. So we are assuming that there is no perfect, the markets are not in perfect competition. So each firms apply prices are determined apply markup. Um, so this implies that our job market will be, in this case we have the real wage that union are able to bargain for each level of unemployment. At the same time, firms want to pay an horizontal, respect to the unemployment rate, an horizontal real wage which is equal to 1 divided by 1 plus the markup me. And this is the equilibrium in the labor market, which identify a unique level of unemployment rate which we call natural unemployment rate. And we will see that this natural unemployment rate is not given by nature, but it's given by the economic structure or economic system. But what we can see is that, for instance, an increase in the markup means will implies a shift downward of this relation. Because of an increase in markup, and then an increase in the natural unemployment rate, which we specify now is not the actual unemployment rate, is a sort of equilibrium unemployment rate. The actual unemployment rate may diverge from the natural unemployment rate. is an equilibrium unemployment rate. So if the level of competition within our economic system reduces for regulation, for the existence of barriers, uh, we have an increase in the natural unemployment rate and a shift downward of this relation. The opposite holds if we have a reduction in markup. In this case, the line shift upward because and we will have a reduction in the natural unemployment rate, which is an equilibrium unemployment rate. And what we can say is that in order to reduce the markup, what antitrust policy are able to increase the level of competition within our economic system to reduce the markup level. So our structural reform, because using markup is structural reform which are able to reduce the equilibrium unemployment rate, so the natural unemployment rate, which again I specified something different respect to the actual unemployment rate we observe in the economy, which is connected with the actual GDP, but I will specify this topic. The same effect on the national unemployment rate can be obtained by reforming the labor market. As we can see, we can also move this relation, taking fixed this one. In equilibrium we have the national unemployment rate. Now suppose that we have a reduction in Z, so more flexibility in the labor market. In this case, this curve shift to the left, and we have a reduction in the natural unemployment rate, in equilibrium unemployment rate, which is not the actual unemployment rate. We need to distinguish between the two. So this one is the shift to the left. If the union power increase, this implies a shift to the right, so an increase in this one is 2, an increase in the natural unemployment rate, which is not the actual unemployment rate. I want to specify better this topic because if we consider the equilibrium, here we have the unemployment rate, the real wage that can be bargained by union, and the real wage that firms are willing to pay. In equilibrium, you have this level of unemployment, which is an equilibrium unemployment rate. Is an equilibrium unemployment rate means that if the unemployment rate is greater than the actual unemployment rate is greater than the this equilibrium, in the medium run, through price changes, we will see better this actual unemployment rate should converge towards this natural unemployment rate. Now, it's not clear this process, but if the actual unemployment rate is greater than the natural unemployment rate, this implies that prices increase, and through the prices increasing, which is equivalent to a restrictive monetary policy, the GDP go down, so the unemployment rate sorry, it's the opposite. In this case, the unemployment rate, the prices decreases because the GDP, so the GDP increases because this is equivalent to an expansion in monetary policy, and this increasing economy should reduce the unemployment rate towards the equilibrium value. The opposite applies if the actual unemployment rate is lower than the natural unemployment rate. In this case, the prices will increase, the GDP will decrease due to the increase in prices, and the actual GDP should converge toward the equilibrium level, which is the natural unemployment rate. Okay, now we are able to derive the aggregate supply relation using uh, the fact that nominal wage that union are able to bargain will be a function of Z and U, which multiplies the expectation of prices, are equal to the prices in the previous period. At the same time, prices at time t are equal to 1 plus the markup, which multiplies nominal wage. We can substitute nominal wage here, and we get that prices at time t will be equal to 1 plus the markup, which multiply real wage, which is a function of Z and U, which multiplies the expectation in price. This relation is our AS. We can also simplify, we can also try to understand the link between GDP and unemployment rate. The definition of the unemployment rate is L minus N over L, where L is the labor force and N is the number of L is the number of L is the number of people we are willing to work, N is the number of employed people, so this is the unemployment rate, which can be also expressed as 1 minus N over L, but this is equal, given our assumption according which GDP is equal to N, is equal to 1 divided minus Y over L. Well, this definition seems to suggest that there is a one-to-one relation between unemployment rate and GDP, but this is not true because we need to consider two hypotheses. The first hypothesis is the discouraged or encouraged work hypothesis, in the sense that when the economy grows, so when the GDP increases, we have also an increase in people looking for a job. So this implies that this affects increases the level of unemployment because there are more people also work. At the opposite, when the economy, when we are in recession, there is also a reduction in the number of people who are looking for a job. So in this case, we can observe also a decrease in the unemployment rate given the definition of unemployment rate. This is the first reason. The second reason is that when the GDP grows, maybe that we have an increase in the number of worked hours and not in the number of workers. Okay. At the same time, when we have a decrease in GDP, we can have a decrease in the working hours and not necessarily a reduction in the number of workers, especially for high skilled workers. Okay, so worked hours a, a better indicator of the cycle of GDP. But due to this consideration, we are not able to assert that there is a one-to-one relation. But now we assume that there is a one-to-one relation, so the aggregate supply can be expressed again as 1 plus the markup, which multiplies uh, the real wage, which is a function of Z. The unemployment rate is 1 minus real GDP or L, which multiplies prices at time t minus 1. Now we are able to understand the connection between each one of these components and prices. The markup has a positive effect on prices. The union power has a positive effect on power because it leads to an increase in wage. Also, prices at time t minus 1 increases prices at time t because wage incorporate this expectation, and so firms increase prices, but GDP has a positive also effect on prices, because if GDP increase, unemployment rate decrease, and so uh, wage increase and price increase. This relation can be represented in the same space of the AD relation, in which we have uh, prices, and at the same time we have GDP. The AS relation is an increasing function between is the relation, positive relation between price and real GDP, because if the real GDP increase, the unemployment rate decrease, and so wage increase and price increase. The point is that now we need to accept the concept of natural GDP. And the concept of natural GDP, uh, uh, the concept, before to explain this, we can observe also shift in the AS relation. The AS relation will shift to the left for increase in me, increase in Z, but also if prices at t minus 1 increase, so if there is a change in the expectation of prices for time t, also in this case, the AS relation will shift to the left. The opposite, so shift to the right, holds if we have a reduction in me, if we have a reduction in the union power, and if we have a reduction in price expectation. All this thing implies a shift to the right.